Well, good morning. I'm waiting just for one or two people to arrive, and then I will begin this presentation. It's an artist talk. I want to talk a little bit about technique and the process by which I make drawings and paintings. So if you don't mind, I'll give people another minute or two. Lots of people I can see are arriving, and I'll give them a moment or two to join us, and then I'll begin properly. Okay, so good morning. Welcome to Damian Callan TV. It's a bit like Netflix. There's no advertisements apart from advertisements for my work. So today I was going to do a short artist talk, and I was going to talk a little bit about the process by which I make drawings and paintings. I'm going to begin with this painting here, which is recent, from 2020, this year. And I'm going to explain some of the ways in which I go from an idea through drawings in charcoal and pastel before embarking on an oil painting like this. And the process that I'm going to describe is probably fairly similar for a lot of the work that's in this exhibition. And then towards the end, I'm going to spend about 30 minutes talking to you and showing you things. Towards the end, I'll look at a couple of other pieces which are different in materials, technique, and so on. So I'm hoping this, if any of you watching are artists, or if you do artwork of your own drawings and paintings and so on, I'm hoping that I can talk a little bit about technique, technical things, philosophical things as well, that might be of interest to you. So this painting here that I'm standing behind is called Kintyre Waves, and it is oil on canvas, and it began life, if you like, as a pastel drawing. I sometimes start with pastel, sometimes start with charcoal, and what I'm going to do is move you now. I'm going to come off the screen, I'm going to move the camera and start to show you some examples of work that we can look at a little bit more closely. And because what I'm talking about with that particular painting is an image with the children in the water. Excuse my technical things here. We're slightly challenged here because the lighting for the exhibition is brilliant, but it's not very good lighting for filming. So everything comes out a little bit yellow. But anyway, never mind, at least you can see. So I wanted to, as I say, go through some of the steps by which I might produce a drawing or a painting. The painting that I began with there, Kintyre Waves, there were 4 of the girls, 1 of my daughters, 2 of my nieces, and another friend. And that's a similar set of figures here in this drawing. So this is a charcoal drawing. Because my subject matter is the moving figure, and I want figures that aren't necessarily posing, but that are actually just sort of naturally going around their everyday holiday business, playing in the water, whatever it is, I like to work with photographs as a starting point. So I take lots and lots of pictures, and if you like, the advent of digital photography has been fantastic because I can be really carefree about how many pictures I take. So I take a lot of photographs, and among these photographs, many of which aren't very good photographs, but they do contain the information that I want, which is how do these figures, how do these bodies move when they're running, playing, whatever. And from those photographs, I then start to produce charcoal drawings or pastel drawings. So there's an example here. This one has been bought, so I can't unwrap it, and there might be a bit of a shine on it, but I'm going to show you some other ones where we can get into a bit closer and look at a little bit more detail. But I work in different ways. I'll often do a line drawing first, scribble a bit. There's a particular way of drawing where you draw a line but you don't take your charcoal or your pencil off the page. It's a continuous line that's kind of searching and dynamic. And I'll start with that, and then I'll start to block in tone, light and dark, well, tone, block in dark, and then remove some of the charcoal with a rubber, an eraser, and lift off some light. So that's a kind of process by which I'll start extracting from the photograph some of the information that I want. I'm going to show you a different drawing now, and this is one that's been unwrapped, so there won't be such a shine on it, because I think it might be interesting to go a little bit closer and let you see in more detail. So this is one of the drawings of Ruth putting on a dress, and it is also, like the other drawing I've just shown you, made with willow charcoal on watercolour paper. So I think you can see when I get a bit closer there that it's a textured surface. Willow charcoal, if you've never used it, is a fantastically fluid medium. You can put it on in a plentiful way, smudge it, and then very often, especially if the paper's reasonably good, you can lift it all off again. So I'm hoping that by looking at this sort of detail, you can see, firstly, the texture of the paper. You can see blocks of charcoal, darker and not so dark, and then you can probably see where I've used a rubber to lift it off. That's the process that I've described there already. So putting on shapes, smudging, moving the charcoal around, because as I say, it's a terrifically fluid medium, and then perhaps defining, adding light. I mean, I'm interested in the figure, I'm interested in light, and those effects can be achieved by, I'm trying to make it smaller, there we go, by working with the charcoal and the eraser and so on. So that was looking at that in a little bit more detail. This one doesn't really have any lines, so you might be interested to compare, how many lines there are in this drawing and this one that has really only got these shapes. I think it might be of interest to some people, the fact that I did produce a couple of books 5 or 6 years ago. One was on Degas, one was on Renoir, and the techniques of those two artists are almost contrasting, opposite ends of a particular scale. Degas drew lots of lines. He was really into fluid, dynamic lines that described movement. And actually he's always quoting his master Ingres, who, when he first encountered him, said, "Draw lines, young man, plenty of lines." So Degas all about lines. Renoir, the other artist that I did a book on, by contrast, was very much about colour and shapes, not lines at all. Degas would start a drawing with lines. Renoir would start painting, because he didn't do a lot of drawing, just with shapes, with colours spread across the canvas. So that's always been a big dilemma for me. What do I do? Do I start with lines? Do I start with shapes? This is a drawing, as I said, which is all shapes. There's no lines in there at all. So I've kind of reconciled myself eventually to doing a bit of both. What a compromise. But anyway, there you go. That's the relevance of that. So those are black and white. That's a good way to start. But colour-wise, I also do a lot of work in pastel. And again, this can be part of a process. I'm showing you this pastel drawing because it's a little bit like the painting that I started with. It's figures in the water, and it's got the same sort of limited palette, limited colour scheme of browns and purples, lilacs. I don't think it's come out terribly well under this light. But again, you can see that I'm working with these, in this case, sort of silhouetted shapes, really. So what I find fantastically useful about pastel, any of you watching this might be experiencing how difficult it can be to work with colour. You might mix colour in paint, you don't know what colours to use, you can't make the colours that you think you need, and so on. Well, I find that working with pastels, a box of pastels, maybe 36, 48 colours, is a really terrific way of dealing with colour, because actually you've got a set of colours there, they're already mixed in the pastel sticks, and you just have to make do with what's there. You very often don't have exactly the right colour you want, so you take something that's approximately what you need and get on with it. So I find that terrifically helpful, and I also find that just by working with the colours that are in the pastel box, I end up with a colour scheme that I quite like and which I can then apply to a painting. So this is an example of that. The children were playing in the water, as you can see, against bright light, and I took some pictures and then worked from those photographs to produce the drawings as I've described. But the colour, because it was against the light and it was a bit later in the day, there wasn't that much colour, and so I just found various blues, lilacs, pale yellow pastels, which seemed to do the trick, particularly against the brown of the figures. And that, if I can now go back to the painting that I showed you at the beginning, that's really what I've got in this painting. And having sort of established that lilac, grey palette for the water in the background, I then started to add more colours to the brown figures. And now they've become quite vivid, really, with their yellows and oranges and so on. But that all began, as I say, with what was offered to me by the box of pastels. The other things I want to say about this painting, I'd like to get a little bit closer and show you. I'm just seeing that we can get a reasonable colour and light on them. But you can see that what I was talking about earlier with Degas and Renoir and these different approaches, there are very few lines in this painting. This is a painting where, having drawn the pastel study, found my colour scheme, I've started to apply paint, not with a brush, but with a roller, with a printmaker's roller. And I think I might have mentioned this yesterday, that it's, for someone who draws well, has a lot of control over drawing, it's sometimes unhelpful to have too much control when you're applying paint in particular, I think. And by drawing and painting with a roller, so that's mixing up colour, having it on the palette, and then picking it up with the roller and rolling it across the picture, but in different ways. You know, I mean, there are different shapes here where I've taken the roller for a bit of a ride around a figure or across a landscape, or sort of bashed it onto the painting to create the effect of the water. That's allowed me to kind of loosen up the drawing, to have a little bit less control, and to have some surprises. I think a really essential part of a process of making a painting is that you should feel a little bit surprised by what happens. Hopefully you're not only surprised, you're delighted. That doesn't always happen, but having a little bit less control in that way, I think can be useful. So I would like to compare that a little bit, maybe with the painting that's next to it, which does relate to the charcoal drawing that I showed you at the beginning. So that's, again, 4 figures, but this time they're running into the water, and I worked on this painting in quite a different way. And again, it's maybe illustrating the sort of dilemma I've talked about. If you look closely at some of the parts of the figures, some of the arms there, or maybe it's particularly most obvious in the arms, you might see a certain amount of drawing, a certain amount of linear work. So this painting began with a very clear bit of drawing, thin, dark paint, diluted and flowing, a bit like the flowing lines of the charcoal, so that I could draw these figures relatively precisely and give them sort of clear, delineated edges. And then I would begin to block in the paint. And with this painting, again, some areas have been applied with the roller. You can see there's lots of texture and movement in the water. But also, I often apply paint just with a piece of card. You can use credit cards, or you can cut up bits of thick mounting card and apply the paint. And that is excellent again for allowing you to sort of follow the lines that you may have drawn out, and that's what I did in this case, but also not have too much, not be too kind of neat about how the colour goes on. It also, as with the roller, allows you to apply a lot more paint. So if there's anything distinctive about my later paintings, people coming to the exhibition have commented on, in a way, the difference. See if I can bring this in here. The painting on the left, these aren't very well lit, but the painting on the left is from 2014. The painting on the right that I've just been looking at is 2020. And there's a distinct difference in the colour. Somebody referred to the 2020 paintings as being the high definition wall, HD, where there's much more colour. And that's maybe because of what I've been learning from Renoir and Degas, but also because of applying paint in these ways with a roller or a piece of card. There's a lot more paint on this painting, so it makes more impact. So that's, I hope, making sense, a bit of a process from charcoal and pastel drawings to these oil paintings, sometimes via a small painted study, which allows me just to see if something is really worth pursuing as an idea. So that's kind of typical of what's in the whole exhibition. Even this earlier work here that I was showing you yesterday and is on my website and in the catalogue. These paintings done often from drawings and then oil paint built up with different techniques. But I thought it would be also interesting for those of you who like to draw and paint to just briefly look at two other techniques. So this particular drawing painting, Barracuda Jump, lots of people have really liked it. And actually sitting here invigilating on my exhibition, I've been thinking more and more about how I'd like to do more work like this. So this is from 2005. If I go close, you can see that it is a combination of pencil and it's actually acrylic paint, and it's done on thick white card, so a kind of robust surface. And the start of this image was a pencil line, again, as I described earlier, a sort of continuous line, not lifting the pencil off the page. And then I mixed up some colours in acrylic and applied them with a really big brush. And I think that's where some of the movement and the energy comes in. You look at the Iris's skirt there, or the way in which Isaac's jumper has only just been filled in. But it's all held together quite nicely with the flowing pencil line. So this was a terrific thing to do. I mean, I find it quite interesting in terms of how the subject matter and the technique come together a bit. You know, it's wonderful just to see children running and jumping and so on, but to capture that sense of movement, it was quite useful that I was doing a really quick pencil line and then literally throwing the paint at the picture. Very, very quick. I mean, don't tell those people who bought these paintings originally, how quickly that happened, because it's a scandalous rate of pay, but it doesn't always work. And I did say yesterday, but this was on the floor of my studio because it wasn't as good as the other four. So I wonder what they're like. Who's got those? So anyway, that's acrylic and pencil, working quickly, and I'm coming back to that technique for sure. Another technique, and I'll finish with these two, that I wanted to just show you, and this is not very good for lighting because you're not going to see that very well. Anyway, let's try and be clever about this. So these are a couple of head studies, one based on a picture of Isaac and the other one of Inez, and it's down as mixed media, but what that refers to is ink, black ink, sort of Indian ink, drawn, used to draw lines and applied undiluted, together with wash, which is the diluted ink, which was applied with sponges, and then some chalk on top. These look pretty good in the catalogue actually, but it's quite hard for me to show you them without the light all going funny, but I'll stay still so that at least isn't a problem. So chalk applied as well, and you might see, if I could just point there, there are areas where I put wax onto the paper before I applied the wash, the dilute ink, and the wax will resist it. So you get these terrific textures. This area up here of Inez's hair, you can see some of that sort of texture. And I've described this a bit with some of the other examples I've been talking about. This idea of having a process where there's a little bit of a surprise. You know, you put down the wax, you don't know exactly where it is. You put over the wash and it all splashes around, and there's a certain degree of accident, hopefully it's the happy accident, and surprise in what happens. So again, this was another technique that was very quick, and I like that process of producing lots of work, and some of the work is successful and you keep it, and the stuff that doesn't work you don't mind because it didn't take a long time to do, and that element of discovery is a great thing to have. So I think I'm going to conclude now. I might just go back to these paintings from this year and stand in front of them to say goodbye to you kind people who've given me some attention. The other thing I wanted to mention, and I'll send this out to you all, is a short film. So my son Isaac has put together a lovely little film, 3 or 4 minutes long. I had asked a number of the people who had lent me paintings for this exhibition if they'd say a few words about their painting, what it meant to them, what it made them think of, and so on. And I have a set of about 6 short clips which Isaac put together, edited with some images and the audio and the images together. So that is going to be on the website, and I'll also attach a link to this live piece so that you can, after you've heard me talking all about technique and process, you can have a look at some of the reflections that other people have made on the work. So thank you very much for listening to and looking at what I've got to show you and tell you. And there'll be one more broadcast tomorrow, 10 o'clock. I'm going to do a demonstration, and probably I'm just going to do a very small portrait study of Ruth. And I'll talk again, I'll demonstrate technique, and you'll see the process of the painting emerging before your very eyes. So thank you very much, and goodbye.